Hey, Danny from FTW Broadcasting here, and it is once again time to talk about Dragon Age 2. So I finished the game, and I actually went about halfway through a second playthrough, and now that the new RPG smell has worn off, so to speak, I really can see the flaws in the game itself, and I wanted to go through and look at the game with the lens of Baldur's Gate 2, which, as I've said, is my absolute favorite game of all time, top RPG ever, just hands down. So by looking at the two games together, we can see where Dragon Age faltered and what it could have done to, uphold the legacy. But first I want to say that Dragon Age 2 is by no means a bad game. As you saw in my first video, I really enjoyed it. I think it's a good game. It could have been a great game, and it makes me sad that it kind of missed out on that opportunity. And maybe had it stood on its own, it hadn't been associated with the original Dragon Age or Baldur's Gate, maybe it would be considered much better in the eyes of the public as a whole, because there's been very mixed reviews. An unfortunate thing for Dragon Age 2 is that it is associated with those older games. It has a legacy to live up to, and when you have a legacy to live up to, you're almost always going to fall short. So, that aside, let's just go down this arbitrary list that I've put together. So the first thing I want to lay out, and I think is really interesting, is the release dates of these previous games. November of 1999, Baldur's Gate 1 was released. 5 months later, Tales of the Sword Coast, Baldur's Gate 1's first expansion, came out. About a year and a half later, Baldur's Gate 2 came out. About 9 months after that, Throne of Bhaal, which is Baldur's Gate's 2 expansion, often considered a large enough game in and of its own. That's probably a whole other thing to go on how great that expansion was. I almost actually consider it part of Baldur's Gate 2. When you talk about Baldur's Gate 2, you mean the Shadows of Amn and the Throne of Bhaal expansion. So, at that point, we had about 8 years to wait before Dragon Age Origins came out. So, a pretty long time. And I think it blew everybody out of the water. It was amazing. So, 4 months later, Dragon Age Origins expansion comes out. One of the faster expansions I've ever seen come out, and the quality showed. It was short, the NPCs were not as interesting, and the story just felt really rushed. Which brings me to Dragon Age 2, getting released just a year after the expansion. Baldur's Gate 1's expansion to Baldur's Gate 2. A year and 6 months. Dragon Age 1 expansion to Dragon Age 2. A year. Now, that 6 months is 6 months 10 years ago, which is, I can't even begin to think what that would represent development time now. And the reason I bring this all up and I put these numbers up here is because I think the greatest flaw with Dragon Age 2 is that it was rushed. And I don't know why it was rushed. I have some thoughts that I will tell you right now. Are you ready? Come a little closer. Now, are you ready for a little bit of a conspiracy theory? I'm going to stop leaning in your face when I tell you, but just imagine that I'm whispering. So, if they gave Dragon Age 2 the extra 6 months that I felt it needed, it would line up pretty hard with the holiday season and Mass Effect 3. You don't want your two releases to, clobber up each other's market. So, conspiracy theory over. Let's move right on. Let's talk about the main character. And let's look at the options for customization of the main character. In Baldur's Gate 2, you have a choice of 7 different races you can make your main character. In Dragon Age 2, you have 1. Okay. In Baldur's Gate 2, you have a choice of 11 different classes, and that I could actually get much larger when you get to the kits, over 30. But just 11 core classes. In Dragon Age 2, you have 3. Wow. Those numbers are pretty different, aren't they? Is that a huge loss to the game? No. But I don't see why you couldn't make Hawk a dwarf. I don't have any understanding of why. Other than the fact that there are family members that are in the game and they didn't want to animate them as dwarves and elves. Oh. I guess I just answered my own question, huh? So, as far as classes are concerned, I'm not going to get too into why various D&D classes are basically just offshoots of fighter or just offshoots of mage, and they're not really new classes. That's a whole nother argument, and I'm not going to get into that. I just want to put those numbers up there and just show how kind of far we've fallen in 10 years. I think it's interesting. NPCs. NPCs are a huge part of any RPG, particularly the ones that can join your party. So let's look at those. Baldur's Gate 2 had a total of 17, including the one that was added in the expansion. 17 party members that you could join your party. Dragon Age 2 has 8. Okay. So, I'm not a math whiz, but one number seems significantly bigger than the other number. And you could say that a reason for that is the party size in Baldur's Gate 2 was larger. You had a 6-person party as opposed to a 4-person party. And to really ramp up the number of NPCs in Dragon Age 2, they all have to have voice acting and possible romances and really big backstories. And I think the biggest thing is the voice acting and the animation and giving them their own quest. Just not having enough time to do more. So I'm not too disappointed in the number of NPCs. And really, I just thank Dragon Age for keeping it a 4-person party. And I'm going to go on a completely, possibly unnecessary aside. And to all you game developers out there that are developing RPGs and action RPGs and anything with a party system, 3-person party is garbage. It is not enough people. 4 is the minimum. 5 is actually a really sweet number. And 6, hell, the more the merrier. But 3 is too few. I'm looking at you, Square, and BioWare. Really everybody since Final Fantasy VII came out. For shame. Alright, so what was I talking about? NPCs. So the NPCs in Dragon Age 2 are really good. I enjoy them. I think they're very interesting. I think they did a good job giving them life, which is also what they did in Baldur's Gate 2. The NPCs are very, very interesting. And maybe there's some Dragon Age NPCs that are interesting and memorable for other reasons. But I think for the most part they stand up pretty well. And I want to give a particular note in Dragon Age 2 to Anders, who went from being a kind of poor man's Alistar, but not being useful, to being a super interesting character in Dragon Age 2. I won't go too into spoilers and what he does and what it's all about, but nevertheless, he was in my party the entire time because I thought it was really interesting, but also because he's the only mage with healing magic. That's a shot at you, BioWare. You should have worked on that. That's not right. The dungeons. I mentioned it in my previous video. Everyone's talking about it. The dungeons in Dragon Age 2 suck. To put it just as plainly as possible, there's nothing really interesting about them. They're reused areas. There's nothing really interesting about any of them. There are no cool puzzles that I can remember, certainly not anything off the top of my head. Baldur's Gate 2 had so many different locations, so many different dungeons, and Crypt number 1 looked so much different from Crypt number 2, even though they were just crypts. And I can remember some really, really cool dungeons, particularly in Spellhold, where there's a large portion of riddles and side things to solve, and it was really, really interesting. And Dragon Age 2 just had the same cave you were just in, only this path isn't blocked off, so you can walk down it, but the path you walked down before is blocked off, so it's different, right? Different? No, it's not different. It's boring. Makes the replay right down the toilet, because I already replayed the dungeon 5 times in my first playthrough. Why do I want to do it again? And this comes to the rushed thing. With only a year, with only a year development time, obviously Dragon Age 2 was probably in the works before Awakening came out, but with only a year development time, I don't think they had enough time, especially since they revamped the engine pretty heavily, to do proper building of dungeons, and it's sad. It really makes me sad that it happened, because it really hurts the game, and it smacks of laziness, but I know that's not the reason. I know it's not laziness that made the game that way. I know I don't want to throw, it's a money thing, da da da. I read somewhere someone's like, the Old Republic is sinking so much money from BioWare that they're ruining all their other franchises by pumping them out for quick cash. I don't think that's 100% true, but I guess it's possible. I certainly hope it's not true. So that's the problem with the dungeons. The next thing I want to mention, as regards to the dungeon, is a little issue with the new system, and all games are doing this now. When the battle is over, you heal up. And that doesn't really make the battles really that tense. It might make an individual battle tense, but it won't make a dungeon tense. In Baldur's Gate, you had issues where you didn't always have a way to raise a party member. They didn't get raised when they died, and they could also permanently die, which is kind of crazy. But I'm kind of glad they got rid of that, because all you ever ended up doing was reloading if somebody permanently died. And in the end, if somebody died in a battle, you could obviously reload it in Baldur's Gate 2. So if somebody didn't die, especially if you didn't have a way to raise them. But there can be the fact that you just basically reset after every battle turns the game into a string of one battle to one battle out. There's no dungeon that feels complete. There's no, oh man, I need to get out of this dungeon. I'm out of health potions. I've got no way to raise myself. I'm down a man. There's none of that, and that loses a lot of tension. And you end up just a series of singular fights, as opposed to a dungeon that has a full feel and a couple fights and a boss to it. And it just doesn't work out without it. And like I said, a lot of times you can just end up reloading and saving and reloading a lot, but that, to me, felt more engrossing and felt like it created more tension than these new systems. That being said, when I go back and I try and play really old Ultima or like Wizardry or something that I didn't play as a kid and is considered a classic, and they are classics, I can't really get into them. Everything's a little obtuse. And I wonder if players now who grew up on these new games would find the system of Baldur's Gate 2 a little obtuse. It's a good experiment. Someone should run that experiment. Maybe me. Let's move on. Now we're moving on to the next place where Dragon Age 2 falls a little short. The story, and more importantly, the villain. The story of Dragon Age 2, as a whole, feels very filler. At no point in time did I feel like there was a real threat going on. The whole story takes place over like 10 years and is very political. There's stuff kind of happening in the background that you sort of have an effect on. and then you don't even have any interaction with the main villain until like the third act, which I guess the main villain is Knight Commander Meredith, but I don't really feel like she's much of a villain. She doesn't really do much. Like, you hear things about, oh, she's doing this and she's bad and she's a tyrant or whatever and she's trying to take power, but you don't really see it, and I don't feel like it really mattered. I didn't feel like it was a threat, and the ending just kind of cements it that this game is so filler. It's just leading up to Dragon Age 3. It's clearly that's all they're doing, and I will say I really kind of liked the ending a lot. And spoiler alert here, on the end where they say you don't know where you see Leliana and they talk about the champion disappeared. You're the champion. You disappeared and they don't know what happened to you. And they make mention of the Warden, which was the main character from the first game, also disappeared. So I'm speculating so that maybe we're looking at some sort of big overreaching goal in Dragon Age 3, import your save that has both. Maybe you'll get to play as both of your characters pulled in together. If somebody from BioWare is watching, take notes, because that would be awesome. Both of my characters from 2 previous games come together. So that's a great kind of ending to the game, but the lead up to it wasn't quite right. So now Baldur's Gate 2 has a great branching story, extends from the first game. I'm not even going to get totally into it. It involves raising gods and perhaps raising yourself to godhood and getting your soul stolen by an evil wizard. And maybe it's cliche, just standard fantasy, here's the evil guy, let's go take him out, but they did it, the characters are so rich and so full of life that in the world it just lives and breathes that you really care and you want to beat this villain, you want to travel, you want to save yourself, and you want to save this world. And that villain I keep referring to, the main villain is Jon Irenicus. And he is probably the best villain ever. Hands down. The things he does and things he says are just so well written, and the voice actor did an amazing job. I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but I will put it in a little box here because he deserves all sorts of credit. And I'm just going to throw a couple clips of him just being awesome right here because I can't even describe it. So we're going to watch a couple clips of him just being great.
Must I be interrupted at every turn? Enough of this! This woman lives and has strength of a sort. She lost her parents to plague, her husband to war, but she persevered. Her farm has prospered, her name is respected, and her children are fed and safe. She lived as she thought she should. And now she is dead. I cannot be caged. I cannot be controlled. Understand this as you die, ever pathetic, ever fool. Silence, dog, you have no purpose but to die by my hand. No, you warrant no villain's exposition from me. You are barely sentient now. I have taken your very divinity and drained you of your soul.
So that's that. I don't know if I got really deep into a lot of things, but I think I touched really strongly on my problems with Dragon Age 2, and I guess the general thesis, it's a weird word, I have trouble saying it, is the game was rushed. Come on, BioWare. Let it cook for a little while. A year waiting? I'd have waited another year. Hell, I waited 8 for Dragon Age. Why? I'll wait another year. I'll wait another 2. If it gives me a game that I can play, you give me a game that I can play for 10 years like Baldur's Gate 2, I'll wait another 10 years. but please don't make me wait another 10 years. That would be bad. So yeah, there's a lot of flaws with Dragon Age 2 that keep it from being a masterpiece like its predecessors. But it's still a good game, and I don't think it should be getting a lot of the hate it's getting. But I understand it, and I'm probably being, maybe I'm being harder on it than I should. But really, even if they spent 3 years on it and every dungeon was fresh, brand new, and vibrant and full of life, it really couldn't have lived up to the legacy of Baldur's Gate 2 for one reason. Well, maybe 1.5. And that is the single greatest NPC of all time. If you know who I'm talking about, you're probably already smiling, thinking about it. And if you don't, you need to play yourself some Baldur's Gate and learn a little bit about this guy. Because it doesn't get much better than this guy. Until next time.
Go for the eyes, Boo! Go for the eyes! Yal!
Even if they spent 3 years on it, and every dungeon was